Welcome to the Toolbox with this time a very short, let's say, video on how to read a textbook, a university textbook, because there is a way to read these textbooks much more easier, smoother and faster, and with much more insights. So, of course, I mean here university level textbooks, and because these have a certain structure that you can exploit, and let's dive into it. So, the way you have been probably taught to read, or self-taught at least, is to read very much in a linear fashion. You go from sentence to sentence and you go from text to text. But the problem though is you miss a lot of elements, especially when you apply to university level textbooks. There is a certain concept that will help you to make your reading much more beneficial. Now, so instead of the classic linear reading, which is just you do the following, there's three easy steps. And the first step is very much about orientation. Most of the textbooks that are presently on the market, I'm talking from the last 10, 20 years, have been designed in such a way they are very educational, very much built with illustrations, with graphics, such that it can help your learning style, and it's quite impressive. So that can be by figures, graphs, overviews, examples. So when you scan the first time a text you want to read, it gives you a good idea of what's happening. What is the structure, the build-up, the examples are being given, how does it look like, and that will help you forward for the next step. And the next step is very much using the text structure patterns, and I'll give an example how that works. Because if you look at these university level textbooks, for example here chapter X, the first part is very much the overview of what will you see in that chapter, and with the conclusion at the end. So instead of reading it linear, you start first reading the overview part. It can be a couple of lines, it can be maybe half a page even, and then you skip to the very end to the conclusion or the summary of that chapter, because it gives you already the summary. So by skipping the green part here, the sub-chapter parts or the paragraphs, you actually learn already what is going to be taught to you, what's going to be mentioned, what's going to be important. So going from 1 to 3, instead of going this linear fashion, you will pick up much more. Now, it's the same with sub-chapters, with paragraphs as well. Here I give an example of paragraph blocks. Very often, but not always, the first sentence will give you an idea what is the paragraph going to be about. And the last sentence will often give you the summary of that paragraph. And the meat of the text is best to be read at the last end. If you look at subchapters, it tends to be like a couple of sentences to start with, and you end up with a couple of sentences. It can be a bit bigger, but it gives an idea of using that pattern. First of all, knowing what's about, and then go to the summary. So you read first the first sentence, then you go to the last sentence, and then you read the rest of the text. And by jumping back and forth, you have much more insight of the story. Try it out. It's kind of fascinating. Not all books do that, by the way. I'll give an example. That's not always the case. But this is very fascinating to apply this principle. Now, so it's very much about jumping back and forth when reading, and that will help you forward to be much more alert when you're reading these university textbooks, because they read almost like a comic book, like a cartoon almost, but still, nevertheless, you need to be focused on what you're reading. So this approach of by jumping back and forward for the chapter part or the sub-chapters, paragraphs, is going to help you a lot before you go to the depth reading of reading the whole text. So it's about very much jumping back and forth. So give it a try. It's a fascinating finding. So I'll give an example. So I took here a sample from Amazon.com on the book from Campbell on biology. It's a classic overview of basic biology. And sure, if you orientate yourself, you will see the content, all the units and things like that. But let's dive into it. So this is the first chapter. And in this case, the summary is a bit shorter. So the key is here to use the idea of key concepts instead of sub-chapters. So the 4 concepts, a bit of on a study tip, something in green, go to Mastering Biology. That's something more like specific for that book. And 2/3 of that page is giving an example. and you can read it, so you have an idea of, oh, they're going to give an example to explain something. So here the overview is very short. Now, if you go to the end, on page 25 in this time, so I jump the meat of the chapter. So I start reading the summary part. Then I see much more detailed information. So chapter concept 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and then I would skip the test here, but this is very helpful. So if you read, for example, concept 1.3, in studying nature, scientists form and test hypothesis, and you can read all that, what's it about, but that gives you an idea of what the chapter or that subchapter will be about. So if you apply this, just an example, first it's about orientation. So concept 1.1, in studying nature, scientists form and test hypothesis. And then you can read a little bit, an inquiry, blah, blah, blah. So you probably understand this will be the summary part, the overview part, what's going to be told, and then you explore it a bit further, and this exploration and observation, a part on gathering, analyzing data. You see this in 2 paragraphs, and you see inductive reasoning. You see here a brief introduction to Jane Goodall. Now, and that can be a trap. The story of Jane Goodall is a very fascinating story. Even there's a movie made on her and her story, and when she was observing the chimpanzee, but also the ape population in the Rwenzori area in Central Africa. So that story itself, if you dive into it, you can easily lose 2-3 hours. So be careful not to be distracted. But it's a fascinating story to dive into. But if you dive in further in the text, forming and testing hypothesis experimentation, figure. Oh, there's a figure here that explains something on a scientific process. Deductive reasoning. Oh, there must be also inductive reasoning. Go back later. Oh, here's inductive reasoning. So you start making links already between paragraphs and subchapters. And then question that can and cannot be answered by science. Okay, 2 parts. Flexibility of the scientific process. And then you see a bigger graph, figure, explanation on forming and testing hypothesis, and you can start reading about it. So by going to this text, you already get a better overview, orientation of what's being offered. A case study, then you must say, hey, I'm going to skip that for later. I park it a little bit away. Variables in controls and experiments, and so on and so on and so on. So by reading very quickly the orientation style, you have already an idea what's going to be told. So here you don't have a summary. This is more like belonging to this part. So there is no let's say summary in the subchapter. So if you go back, then you can start reading, as I mentioned, by going the first part, then the second part. In this case, of the overview part, you can start reading that. And then here as well, exploration and observation. You can start the first line, maybe the second line, and then the last line. And you start understanding that you can jump from first line to last line and start reading the rest of the text. And by doing that, by reading the first line, last line, and then reading the meat of the text, you will start having a better understanding. Now, it's not always that perfect. The last line is not always perfectly the summary of this paragraph, but it is a perfect way to grasp very quickly information. And then at the very end, you start reading it from A to Z, like you do in the classical linear way. So by doing that, it will help you to give a framing, an orientation, a reading comprehension, which is much more deeper. In a certain way, you read it already multiple times, but with different depths from various angles. So versus the one-time only linear reading. So that's the benefit from it. So the easy steps are very much orientation first, like I showed, the use of those patterns, what I mentioned, and you will be jumping back and forth a little bit before you start reading the final text completely. Now, there's a certain benefits linked to this layered approach, because you're much more actively engaged with the text, much more engaged. Also, you start reflecting, hey, what's missing? Is the summary correct? Did I see it before? And you start reflecting and making links already before you start reading. So it's very much stimulating already your short-term memory and also your long-term memory in the end, because you start linking up different parts of the text. So it's a very, very elegant way of reading university level textbooks. And I would really advise you to do it. It's much easier to do. It's smoother, faster. You'll be much more alert. You'll be much more present in reading the text. And that's going to help you a lot when you're reading university level textbooks and when you're studying from a textbook. So give it a shot, give it a try. Let me know in the comments how it's going, and good luck. So the book itself is still available at Amazon.com, by the way. So what I showed you is just like a sample of a sample taken from Amazon.com related to that book. So if that's your field of interest, have a look into it. It's a worthwhile book to read into. So that closes our toolbox for this time. Let me know how it's going in the comment, and see you later for more.